Hopefully we don't have to take any notes today.
Oh
Notes
my god, that'd be awful. Let's not do that.
Yeah, so you know, oh, so how's everyone doing today? Tuesdays, right? Yeah. Okay, so today we're gonna be working on like our final project. So just go into groups, and we're going to be just discussing everything we've done for this semester. So let's get into groups. Let's see, we have like 20 people, so that'd be 6 groups. No, that's 4 groups of 5. No, 5 groups of 4. So let's see. So you 4 go together. You 4 in the back, right over there, and say right there. So we should be good. So yeah, let's get in. Yeah.
Why don't we start with Siddhartha?
Yeah, that's good.
Let's go chronologically.
Yeah. So what did you guys think it was interesting? I mean, I thought it was interesting just because of how just like nice and easy it was, but it had a good message, you know?
Yeah, it definitely had a good message, and it was really cool to see the world from that culture.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it was interesting how, like the Buddha, when he got enlightened, he thought his thing was teach other people about it, but Siddhartha, he also was enlightened, but it was very different. It was more about, it has to come from within. You can't be taught.
Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, I didn't really expect much from it at first, but I was pleasantly surprised at how much I found myself enjoying it. Its storytelling ability was really engaging. My story, I thought at least, was kind of boring. And I'm sure you guys thought that too. What I found interesting about it though was listening to other people's projects and learning about their stories and how similar they were to mine. It was kind of interesting. I guess.
I guess so.
The story did win you $300.
Yeah.
That is a plus.
Oh, Mikey, that was pretty good. Oh, Mikey, looks like your French graph's going up.
Let's move on to Things Fall Apart. It was another book that was kind of similar to Siddhartha, but it was an entirely different culture like the one we've seen.
Yeah, it was cool seeing the perspective we got in AP year was European, and this book was from Africa.
Well, I mean, that's the perspective that we've been looking at for years now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it was just cool to see how they portrayed it.
Like you said, Ryan, Things Fall Apart was a really interesting book that gave a new perspective on African culture. We really don't get that in our education, and it was awesome to see that. I also found it really interesting how in their culture they viewed men and women very differently from the way we do now, and how they grew, only men could grow the yams, and all the women grow the cocoa yams, and all that. It was interesting. It was also weird to see how they hadn't advanced technologically at the same pace we had. I think that's, again, to do with, men grow yams, and that's a manly thing to do. It wouldn't have been manly to make some sort of weird thing that spun through the dirt and chucked all the yams out the back. And what do you guys think? Would they have done that?
Well, going back to that gender roles thing you were talking about, Michael, I thought it was interesting. In the book, they actually have, in African culture as well, they actually have similar gender roles to a degree to our gender roles. But with them, it's more clearly defined, and there are like laws and like strong customs that do that.
Yeah, I agree. It was more clearly defined, and as we move forward with our culture, as I'm sure they would have done as well, the line is kind of blending, and men are doing what we would have traditionally considered womanly things, and especially women doing what we would have traditionally considered manly things. And with especially the way we saw it in Things Fell Apart, Okonkwo was obsessed. He couldn't bear to think of anything in his life being womanly.
Yeah, and on that same point, it's not only him not wanting to be a woman or Agbala, it's him not wanting to be like his father,
Yeah.
because he considered his father to be like a woman and to have womanly values in their culture, even though in our culture we would see him as almost a good man with his kindness and his values.
Yeah, I thought that was a good contrast from the first semester when we learned about the Odyssey, how Telemachus had his very manly father and it's hard for him to live up. And we see the reverse and things fall apart.
Yeah, it's cool to see that. It's also, you know, as the book draws to a close and as they're starting to fight about all of their severely conflicting the two cultures, it's really interesting to see that how that played out in Africa. We really don't hear about how it was so harsh for the Africans, the colonization. We hear about as we dragged them off as slaves, but in their homeland, we really didn't hear about that.
Yeah, like the quote Mr. McLeod had up says, the story of the hunt will always be told from the perspective of the hunted, of the hunters.
Not the hunted.
Yeah.
The hunted get forgotten, and
That's why Things Fall Apart is so interesting and so important.
Yeah, I wish they'd teach that more in schools.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting, Michael. I think we should start talking about All Quiet on the Western Front.
Alright.
Well, what do you think?
The book brings up a lot of interesting themes. We learn about Paul getting dehumanized by the war, both with his comrades and his enemy. We learn about how morals are different during wartime and peacetime, and how it can be a struggle to go between them. You know, what's practical and what's right. In the battlefield, you don't really have a choice to do what's ideal.
Yeah.
But when you're back at home, you usually have to.
I thought one thing that in specific was pretty interesting was how he called Kemrick's mother stupid just because she didn't have the same values that he did at wartime. So just because the war had conditioned him so much that her not seeing it from his perspective and valuing her own son's life so much, he considered her whole self to be stupid because of it.
And I thought it was interesting, that whole paragraph that we analyzed, all the relating them and how much they were dehumanized to beasts and how we should dehumanize.
Yeah.
That's interesting. It compares to Things Fall Apart. The white settlers kind of compared and thought of the inhabitants already there as beasts, or as they didn't share their values, so they thought they were stupid.
The book is also really timeless, just like the Iliad is, and we saw that video, how they showed it to the modern soldiers. They really still struggle with the same thing. Like, as we know, the suicide rate is really high for veterans today. So I just think that the book is going to be, in the future and now, a good way to see what it's like for veterans.
Yeah, I think it's honestly, like you said, comparing it to the Iliad, I think it's going to be compared to things like the Odyssey and the Iliad, especially the Iliad, for a long time to come. It's going to be one of those classic books that students read for a long time.
Yeah. I also think it's really good in relation to our philosophy and justice unit, because it brings up a lot of interesting questions. And some of these compared to questions soldiers have to deal with today. Like, if you remember the goat herd question, whether to kill the goat herd or not. And yeah, you can use the same philosophical theories, both on that and in All Quiet.
That's interesting, though. Let's start talking about philosophy.
Yeah, I think that's pretty interesting. And also, I think that the philosophy unit has actually been like our most important unit and my favorite unit personally this year, just because it's been the most useful. I mean, whether it's just us talking about like our everyday conversations or arguments, or whether we're talking about things going on in our different classes, we're always now bringing up all the different philosophers and all their theories. I mean, they all have their own way of tackling these complex moral ideas, and I think to live a good life, you have to sort of meld them all together, as we've been talking about, and really have a combination of all the theories. Yeah, I think utilitarianism is probably the best base just for, analyzing your small, everyday, little decisions. But, one's measure of happiness can be different from someone else's, and you can't really be objective. So when you're looking at those larger, big-scale decisions, I think you have to kind of look to the other theories in conjunction with utilitarianism. such as Rawls' veil of ignorance, the original state of equality, and Kant's categorical imperatives. Oh, Spencer, that was pretty good. Snaps, everyone, snaps. Okay, well, it looks like there's been some good discussion going on in the class, so could everyone just kind of turn their desks into discussion mode, and we'll get started with just everyone talking about what they discussed in their groups. Yeah. So yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like yeah.
Yeah.